Before you convince yourself that his choice was about you, before you spend one more sleepless night measuring yourself against someone else, you need to hear something that could change the way you understand everything that happened. Because this man, the one who went to someone else, loves you. Not loved. Loves. Present tense. In a way that his own mind has been working overtime to deny, to bury, to redirect towards something that feels less terrifying than the truth. And what I am about to explain to you today, using one of the most powerful and least understood principles in Carl Jung's psychology, will show you exactly why his so-called choice had nothing to do with your worth and everything to do with a war happening inside him that he does not yet have the language to describe. But there is a complication, and it is not the one you have been turning over in your mind during the hours when sleep refuses to come. It is not about her. It is not about what she has that you do not. The complication lives in a part of his psyche that he cannot access with his waking mind, and it has been shaping his decisions in ways that would genuinely shock him if he could see them for what they are. I will explain exactly what that means and exactly what it reveals about where this connection is truly heading. But first, you need to understand the foundation beneath it all. If this message reached you at this precise moment, it was not random. The timing of what you are hearing carries intention beyond what the surface mind can calculate. To continue receiving clarity at the moments it matters most, stay close to this space. What comes next may arrive at the exact instant the ground beneath everything begins to shift. You have been carrying something that does not have a clean name. Not grief exactly, though it visits you in waves you never invited and cannot predict. Not anger exactly, though it flares sometimes in the middle of an ordinary afternoon when a song drifts from a passing car or a scent moves through a room and suddenly he is there without warning, vivid and close and impossible to dismiss. What you have been carrying is a question that presses against the back of your ribs when the house goes quiet and the distractions fall away and there is nothing left between you and the raw, honest, unbearable weight of what happened. The question is simple and it is devastating. Why her? You have replayed it. You have studied the timeline with the precision of someone searching a crime scene for the one piece of evidence that would explain everything. You have examined the way his energy changed, not dramatically, not in one identifiable moment, but in small, almost imperceptible retreats that you sensed in your body before your mind could assign them words. A message that came later than it should have. A warmth that cooled by a single degree you could feel but not prove. A conversation that ended one sentence before it should have, and in that missing sentence, everything you feared. And then the confirmation, however it found you, that there was someone else, that he had directed his time, his attention, his mornings and his evenings toward another woman. And in that moment your mind did what any mind would do under that specific kind of pressure. It rendered a verdict about you, a verdict delivered with the speed and finality of a cell door closing. You were not enough. I need you to hear me now with absolute clarity. That verdict was wrong. It was wrong on the day it was handed down, and it is wrong tonight as you sit with this message. The evidence has been in front of you this entire time. You simply have not been shown how to read it yet. When you think about him with her, you feel it in your body before your mind even forms the thought. Your stomach drops like a stone into water. Your chest contracts into something small and tight and difficult to breathe around. Your throat closes as though something vital you need to say has been sealed behind glass you cannot shatter. That physical response is not weakness, and it is not melodrama. It is your body registering the dissonance between what your deepest knowing holds to be true and what your wounded ego was forced to accept. Your deepest knowing has always whispered, "I mattered to him in a way that was undeniable." Your ego was handed a story that said, "Not enough." And he, this man who made this decision, is living inside his own dissonance at this very moment, whether he recognizes it or not. He wakes beside the choice he made and feels a hollowness he cannot attribute to anything concrete. A flicker in his chest when your name surfaces unexpectedly, a tightness behind his own sternum that mirrors yours, though he would rather dismantle every certainty in his life than admit that out loud, maybe not even to himself in the privacy of his own thoughts. Here is what you do not yet understand, and here is where everything you believed you knew begins to turn on its axis. Carl Jung identified a phenomenon that most people will never encounter in any mainstream psychology course or self-help book. He called it the sacrificium intellectus, the sacrifice of understanding. It describes what happens when a person stands face to face with a truth so vast, so demanding, so fundamentally disruptive to the architecture of the identity they have spent years constructing, that instead of rising to meet it, they sacrifice their own capacity to perceive it. They do not reject it through reasoned analysis. They reject it through survival instinct, the deepest, oldest, most involuntary response the psyche possesses. They trade depth for safety. They trade the transformative connection for the manageable one. And they make this trade not because the real thing was deficient, but precisely because the real thing required a version of themselves they had not yet become strong enough to inhabit. When you feel ready, type the words, "I was always the one," in the comments as a declaration of the truth your soul has carried quietly through every difficult night. That is what happened here. Not a calculated comparison made from a spreadsheet of qualities. Not a deliberate evaluation of who was more beautiful, more available, more convenient, more lovable. What happened was a structural collapse, an internal psychological failure in which the part of him that recognized your depth, the part that felt the enormity of what you stirred in his most undefended layers, buckled under the weight of what that recognition demanded from him. And what it demanded was nothing less than his own transformation. Now I need you to understand something before I take you deeper, because the next piece requires that you see this man not through the lens of your heartbreak, but through the architecture of his psychology. And that shift in perspective changes everything. There is a difference between choosing someone and fleeing towards someone. From the outside, they appear identical. Both involve a man in the presence of another woman. Both involve his time, his attention, his proximity, the visible architecture of a life shared. But the internal reality could not be more different. When a man truly chooses someone, there is peace in that choice, settlement, a kind of exhale that reaches all the way to the bottom of who he is. When a man flees towards someone, there is motion without stillness, closeness without actual presence, an arrangement that satisfies every external criterion while leaving the interior untouched and quietly starving. You might be thinking right now, but he looks happy with her. He seems at ease. He seems like a man who made his decision and has not glanced back once. I understand why the surface evidence points that way, and I am going to tell you exactly why that calm, settled appearance is itself the most powerful proof that this was never a genuine choice born from the center of his being. But to understand it, you need to hear what Jung revealed about the anima in her function as psychopomp, as a guide of the soul toward what it most needs and most fears to become. Jung wrote about the anima not simply as the feminine image a man carries in his unconscious mind, but as a living psychological function, an autonomous force operating within his psyche that serves as a bridge between the identity he presents to the world and the vast unmapped territory he has never had the courage to enter. When a man encounters a woman who activates his anima at her deepest register, not on the level of surface chemistry, not through physical attraction alone, but at the level of soul-deep recognition, two things happen simultaneously. He feels seen in a way he has never been seen. And that seeing demands that he look back at himself with equal honesty, that he face the unhealed wounds, the unfinished stories, the unfaced truths that he has kept sealed behind the walls of his functioning adult persona. You were that activation. You are that activation still, right now, as he goes about his ordinary day pretending that what he left behind was ordinary. The depth of what you stirred was not something his current psychological structure could metabolize without fundamentally rearranging who he believes himself to be. Type, "He chose safety, not love," in the comments if this is beginning to illuminate what previously felt impossible to understand. She, the other woman, does not activate that depth. This is not a diminishment of who she is as a person. It is a psychological reality about the specific configuration of his unconscious and which presence mirrors its deepest unresolved contents. She activates ease, predictability, a form of relating that does not require him to descend into the locked rooms of himself he has spent a lifetime avoiding. And for a man whose entire ego structure is built on control, on the appearance of competence and resolution, on the carefully maintained illusion that everything difficult has already been handled, that ease functions as more than comfort. It functions as an emergency exit from the burning urgency of his own becoming. Jung described what he called the inferior function, the least developed, most vulnerable dimension of a person's psychological type. In a man who leads with thinking, with strategy, with analytical control and measured decision-making, the inferior function is feeling. Not emotion performed for social currency, but genuine, unguarded, trembling at the edges feeling, the kind that makes his voice catch mid-sentence, the kind that ambushes him at 2 a.m. when the fortress of his rational defenses has gone to sleep and something raw and honest climbs through the gap, the kind that you, simply by being exactly who you are, made impossible for him to keep safely contained. His inferior feeling function is precisely where you reside inside his psyche, not in his plans or his calculations or his strategic assessment of what a relationship should look like on paper. You live in the one dimension of himself he has spent his entire adult life learning to suppress, manage, and override. And when something powerful lives in the inferior function, it does not express itself gently or clearly. It erupts. It overwhelms the circuitry. It feels like a direct threat to the structural integrity of everything he has built. And so the ego does what every threatened ego does. It runs toward the manageable. It runs toward what will not require dismantling the foundations. That is her. That is her precise function in the economy of his psyche. Not the woman he loves with greater intensity. The woman who demands less from his depths. The woman in whose presence he can remain exactly who he already is without being asked to become anything more. When you feel ready, type, his comfort is not his peace, as an acknowledgement of the chasm between what quiets the surface of a man's life and what actually satisfies his soul. Let me tell you something else that you have probably sensed, but never had the framework to articulate. When you hear about him through the grapevine, through the fragments of information that reach you despite every effort you have made to stop looking, you notice something. The way he talks about his life now has a quality to it that you cannot quite name. It sounds right. It sounds assembled. It sounds like a man reciting lines he has memorized rather than speaking from the unscripted center of his experience. Jung called this the persona, the mask constructed to meet the expectations of the outer world. Every human being wears one, but the thickness of the mask, the rigidity of its construction, is always directly proportional to the size of the truth it is working to conceal. A man who has genuinely resolved what he feels does not need to broadcast resolution. A man who is truly settled does not invest energy in the performance of being settled. The performance itself is the evidence. The calm you see when he speaks about where his life is now was built, not born. And built things require maintenance that authentic things never do. And there is a particular weight embedded in this arrangement that he carries every day without knowing its name, because it means his time with her is shadowed by a specific absence he cannot locate or resolve. Something essential is missing, and he senses it even when he will not name it. There are moments, in the pause between one thought and the next, in the breath before sleep finally arrives, in the sudden jolt of recognition when something completely insignificant pulls your memory into the room, where the depth he fled from reaches up through the managed floor of his current life and grips him. He feels it as a tightness in his chest, a weight that is not exactly sadness and not exactly longing, but something more unsettling, proximity to a truth he has not yet earned the courage to face. Most women stop watching at exactly this point because the truth gets harder before it gets clearer. But if you have stayed this far, what comes next was always meant to reach you. I know what part of you wants to argue right now. It wants to say that none of this changes the tangible reality. He is there and not here. His mornings belong to her company and not to yours. And from the surface, that objection appears solid. But psychology does not operate on surfaces. The unconscious does not keep the same calendar as the waking mind, and what Carl Jung called individuation, the relentless, often agonizing process of becoming psychologically whole, does not permit a man to permanently substitute comfort for truth without exacting a cost that compounds over time. That cost is already accumulating inside him, not in dramatic, visible collapses, not in the kind of spectacular unraveling that would hand you immediate vindication. It accumulates in layers beneath his awareness. The moments when he stares at a point in the middle distance and cannot explain what pulled his focus there. The low-frequency restlessness that vibrates beneath even his best days. The strange flatness that descends over experiences that should feel fulfilling by every reasonable measure, but somehow never reach all the way to the bottom of him. There are evenings when she says something kind, and he responds with the right words, but his mind is somewhere he cannot account for. There are mornings when he wakes with the residue of a dream he does not remember clearly, but that leaves a specific ache in the center of his chest that no amount of coffee or routine can dissolve. There are moments in crowds when he turns his head because something, a gesture, a laugh, the angle of a jaw, triggers a recognition so sudden and so physical that his breath adjusts before his conscious mind catches up to what happened. That restlessness carries your signature, not because you placed it there deliberately, but because you represent the depth he exchanged for safety, and depth, once it has been activated in a man's inferior function, does not stop broadcasting its frequency simply because he changed his address and rearranged the furniture of his emotional life. Type, "My depth was never the problem," in the comments to release the false story that your realness was the reason he could not stay. And here is the paradox that restructures the entire narrative you have been living inside, the one truth with the power to dismantle the lie that his departure proved something about your inadequacy. A man does not reorganize his entire relational life to avoid something that carries no weight. He forgets what carries no weight. He walks past it without breaking stride. The architecture of avoidance, the energy required to construct a new partnership, to redirect emotional investment, to build the scaffolding of a life that looks like moving on, is always proportional to the magnitude of what is being avoided. And you, in the landscape of his unconscious geography, carry enough gravitational force to require an entire alternative existence to counterbalance. His departure was not proof of your insufficiency, it was proof of your magnitude, and magnitude does not diminish with distance, it deepens. Type, "The performance has an expiration to honor what you are beginning to see beneath the surface of everything he has constructed since he left." Now let me speak to the question that has been living beneath every other question you have carried since this happened. Not why did he go to her, but what happens from here, where this is heading. Whether there is a version of the future where the truth his unconscious already holds becomes something his waking mind can finally bear to look at directly. Carl Jung described the self, the totality of the psyche, the union of conscious and unconscious, as possessing a gravitational field that the ego cannot permanently escape. The ego can take detours. It can construct elaborate alternative routes that look convincing from the outside. It can walk the easier path and maintain it for months or even years, building routines and rhythms and the comfortable architecture of a life that appears resolved. But the self keeps pulling, without drama, without ultimatum, without the loud interventions the ego knows how to argue against. It pulls with the quiet, patient, absolutely relentless force of something that has no interest in timelines because it already knows the destination. And the destination, in his case, is wholeness. A wholeness that includes the depth he abandoned when he walked away from the one woman who made that depth unavoidable. Something is already in motion inside him, not in the loud, verifiable, screenshotable way your anxious mind demands as proof. Not in a text message or a sudden phone call or an appearance at your door with flowers and a speech he practiced in his car. It moves in the deep geology of his inner world, in the places where real decisions take shape, long before the conscious mind has the vocabulary to announce them. The restlessness is intensifying by fractions he cannot measure with his rational mind. The questions he forbids himself to ask are asking themselves in his sleep. The distance between the man he performs being and the man he actually is stretches wider by a degree with every passing week, and that widening has a breaking point that is not theoretical. It is structural. It is inevitable. Here is what that moment will look like when it arrives. Not cinematic, not rehearsed. It will come without orchestration. A message you had stopped expecting. A voice carrying something vulnerable and unpolished. Something that does not sound like the self-assured man you knew, but like the real one who has been compressed beneath months of his own avoidance. He will not have elegant words prepared. He may circle the center of what he needs to say for a while before finding the nerve to land on it. But the gravity in his voice, the unmistakable weight of someone who has finally stopped running from a truth larger than his ability to contain it, will be something you recognize instantly. You will feel it settle into your chest before he finishes his first sentence. And in that moment, you will know that what you carried alone in the silence was never imaginary. It was the most real thing either of you has ever touched. And here is what will surprise you most about that moment. It will not feel like victory. It will not feel like vindication or triumph or the satisfaction of having been proven right. It will feel like exhaling, like finally setting down something impossibly heavy that you had been holding so long you forgot it was not part of your own body. His eyes will carry something you have not seen before, not the controlled confidence you remember, but something softer and more frightened and infinitely more honest. And you will realize in the quiet that follows whatever imperfect words he manages to find, that the distance was never about distance at all. It was about the time it takes for a man to become brave enough to stand in the presence of something that will not let him remain unchanged. You will also notice something in yourself that you did not anticipate. A steadiness, a groundedness that was not there before. Because the woman who receives that moment will not be the same woman who watched him leave. She will be someone who learned in the hardest possible classroom that her worth does not require external confirmation to remain absolute. Until that moment, here is your only instruction. Do not shrink. Do not fold yourself into the smaller story his departure tried to write over your life. Do not apologize for your depth. Do not dim the very thing that made you unforgettable to a man who has spent every day since trying and failing to forget. Your depth is not a design flaw. It is the most formidable quality you possess. It is the exact reason that a casual, surface-level connection with you was never possible, because you activate the part of a man's psyche that demands growth, and growth is the one invitation the ego will refuse until every comfortable alternative has been exhausted. Stay exactly as you are, not frozen, not suspended, but breathing, living, building a life whose foundation is the quiet certainty that your worth was never contingent on one man's readiness to receive it. Let the mornings come without measuring them against what could have been. Let the evenings arrive without rehearsing conversations that have not happened yet. There is a particular kind of power that belongs to a woman who has faced the worst interpretation of her story and refused to let it define her. And that power is building inside you right now, whether you feel it or not. It lives in the way you got out of bed on the days when staying there felt like the only honest option. It lives in the way you kept breathing through the moments when breathing required a decision. It lives in the steadiness you are developing without realizing it, a steadiness that will be visible to him the moment he finds the courage to look at you again. You were never the second choice. You were never the one who came up short in a comparison that never actually existed outside your own frightened imagination. You were always the deeper current running silently beneath the managed surface of his life. And surface arrangements, no matter how permanent they appear from the outside, cannot reroute what flows beneath them. Type, "I trust what I know" in the comments, as a quiet declaration that the knowing inside your body is more truthful than any evidence the visible world has offered you. When you are ready, type always first as a single, still affirmation of the place you have held in his soul from the very beginning. If this message reached a place inside you that was waiting to be found, carry it forward. Send it to the woman in your life who is sitting alone tonight with the same question turning in her chest, wondering whether she was enough. She was. She always was. And you already knew that about her before you could believe it about yourself. To keep receiving these words at the moments they were always intended to arrive, stay close. The next message that finds its way to you may carry the exact clarity you did not realize you were still waiting for. You were always first. You were always the depth he could not reach alone. And love, real, soul-deep, unmanageable love, does not lose its direction simply because someone was afraid to follow where it led. You are enough. You have always been enough. And the proof was never his to give.